Hello everybody! Today we're going to be doing some watercoloring. So for this project I have this watercolor canvas. I'm going to be using some washi tape right here. I'm choosing purple and I have a set of watercolors. I got this set a couple years ago. They last for a decent amount of time. I also have this brush here. It comes with the watercolor set and it has a fluffy tip. It's good for absorbency, but what I'm actually going to be using today is this. It is a refillable watercolor brush, which means it has its water in it, and you can control the flow of the water, and when you want to fill it, you twist this cap off here, and then it comes right up through the tip, and the bristles stay nice and damp, and then you can have this little cap. So what I'm going to be doing first is actually masking off the edges. I'd like to have a little bit of an edge from my artwork, but I don't think I want the full width of the washi tape, so I'm just going to make sure to press it really heavily, and I'm going to do that, you'll see, on all four sides. Alrighty, so now that I have my washi tape, I'm just going to sketch lightly what I'd like to sketch. Today I'll be watercoloring some lavender. I really wanted to have the feel of something relaxing and fresh, and I was really inspired by the lavender color. And I'll actually be putting in some bees as well. You can see me sort of draw them here because bees go naturally with lavender. I, right here, am actually masking off the bees so that I can watercolor over them, and when I want to watercolor the yellow, it won't be diluted by the color of purple that will be sort of all over this canvas. A good tip when you're watercoloring is to try and watercolor in layers, and layers are best light to dark. So that means if I wanted to change up my color scheme to do bees, I would need to have a blank canvas. So I'm just masking it off for that. Right now you'll see me actually wetting the canvas. This is better for the watercolors to flow easily. And then I'm actually going to be doing a common painter's trick. Artists do this, painters do this, but if you paint a few layers of white around the edge where your washi tape is and let it dry, you'll minimize the amount of bleed through that your other colors will have. So you'll see later that there's just a little bit of bleed through on this canvas, which I prefer to trying to clean up a lot of edges. And I'm also going to do that around the washi tape around the bees so that I can make sure to try my best to have a clean white canvas. And then we're going to start with layers. I'm choosing this blue here, and I'm going to spread this all over the canvas, and it's going to turn into a very nice light blue. And then when I talked about layers, this is really important because you'll see me go from a lighter color to a darker color pretty steadily. And while you can put a lighter color on another layer over a darker layer, it doesn't really show up the way that a darker color over a lighter color would. So it's always easiest to try your best to do all the lighter shades first, and then also to move backwards to forwards in terms of sort of spatial awareness. I'm doing the background here first because the lavender that I'm going to draw in the front, I'm going to draw over the top of everything that I've already drawn. So you'll see me using some blue here because I want to represent the shadows or the lavender I see here in the distance. And those will be a little bit of a different, more muted shade than the lavender that you see in the foreground. And it looks very dark here, and it will sort of remain that way because we'll be adding lots and lots of layers onto it. But the technique I'm using to sort of draw these lavender petals is by using a crisscross motion with my brush and just sort of crisscrossing all the way down the stem of the lavender that I've drawn. And then I added another layer of purple, and you'll see me bring the brush from the bottom upwards in sort of a vertical stroke. And then I'm adding some white to enhance this sort of appearance. This is going to look like grass in the distance. And then I'm adding some additional flower petals here and there to try and build up some of these lavender fields in the distance. Okay, so now I'm taking a smaller version of my refillable watercolor brush, and I'm using the same crisscrossing motion, however, just a little bit smaller. And this is going to denote sort of the medium ground where some of the lavender is closer to you, and you see it in that deep lavender color. And already you can sort of see the illusion of these crisscrossing hash marks where you can see a little bit of a difference between the lavender in the background and the lavender in the foreground. I'm also taking this time, you'll see, to lightly brush a thin line for a stem. That line will be a little bit more green or brown later, but this is a nice guideline for me. Alrighty, and here you're going to see me start to make very large sort of lavender sprigs, and these are the lavender that I want to depict in the very close foreground. And I'm doing a similar hashing mark where I use my brush, but instead of pulling it downwards, I'm actually just pressing the brush so it has a natural petal-like appearance. Something that I really like about these refillable pens is that you can really control the amount of pigment that you have in the bristles because you can put water directly on the watercolor puck inside of the actual palette, and when you mix it together you can control how watery that pigment is, and it really helps to sort of define the image that you can see in your head. Okay, so I have actually let this dry for about 10 or so minutes, and I am actually painting on a dry watercolor canvas. It's kind of important when you are changing color palettes to make sure that you let your canvas dry before doing so, and that will prevent any sort of uh, bleeding or strange. It's called cauliflower brush because when you have an oversaturated watercolor brush and you put it on a canvas, sometimes it just spreads. So just make sure you dry your canvas in between. And I'm adding here some larger leaves that I want to fill in the background. These will be depicted a little more closely later, but I'm trying to just block out some of the color that I want to use. And then I'm going in with a darker color and putting in some of the shadows. So I will follow along the leaves that I just created, and you'll see me try and mark out very specific locations for stems, but I'm trying to place the shadows of those leaves and those stems so that it gives a little bit of three-dimension. All right, and now you're seeing me come in with actually a very deep brown, and it's this sort of greenish brown here, but it looks black on canvas, and I am trying to depict the middle of the stem. So in terms of layers, I've drawn the back half of a lavender stem, and then once I add the middle stem, now I'm going to go forward, and the layers that I add on top of that are actually going to be lighter layers that are going to show through so that you can see the stem through this layer. So as you can see, I'm using this lighter sort of magenta purple to try and highlight a little bit, and you can see it's not quite as pigmented because this is a lighter shade, and so the darkness of the purple that I was using earlier is bleeding through, and for this purpose that is absolutely fine, and I think it creates a lot of depth. But if you were painting something, say when I paint the bees later, if I were to place yellow on top of this purple, it wouldn't be as vibrant yellow as I'd want it to be, which is why I masked off the bees earlier in washi tape. Now you'll see me mix a little bit of the pigments. I do this occasionally when I can't find the exact color that I want. You can always water the puck and wash it off later if you prefer, but I don't mind a little bit of extra color. And you can see that now that we have these 3 layers of color, these lavender sprigs are starting to look more three-dimensional, and they're starting to take shape as something in the foreground. These techniques can be used for pretty much any watercolor drawing that you want to do, whether that be a garden or trees or something that you see on a daily walk. It doesn't have to be exactly lavender. And so now that you see I've taken off the masking tape, I have these nice bright white patches that I can fill with yellow, and they won't be muted in purple. I did decide randomly to add a few bees in the distance, and I actually really liked this decision. I'm going in here with a shadow, and I must apologize. I did not notice that there was a fuzziness to my camera when I was recording this, so I apologize for that. But I'm just going in here with a deeper yellow to sort of captivate the shadow of these bees, and also the depth of their sort of fuzziness. And then I'm picking out here the head and some of the stripes. And I wanted these bees to be very sort of fluffy and sweet. Here I am going in with the smaller watercolor brush that I have, and I'm just using delicate little hash marks to simulate hairs or fur on these bees. And I'm going to do a couple layers of this, you'll see. But mostly I want to make it look like they're in flight, so the wind that might be going through their hair, or the brush of pollen or something to that nature. And the more layers that you do of this, the more that it sort of takes shape. And then here I'm doing a little bit of a sort of cartoony wing. I wanted the shape of the wing to happen, but I didn't know how to draw a realistic wing, and I think it turned out okay. Alright, so here I'm just going back in with my brush, and I'm putting a little bit more depth. I didn't want too light of a lavender here, and so I'm taking this opportunity to sort of fill out more of the deep shades of the individual petals here. Perfect. And then I'm gonna peel my masking tape. Perfect. So I'm notating here a couple of the edges that I need to cover up. And then I'm going to be using a white Jelly Roll pen. You can use any sort of ink if you have maybe a whiteout pen, or you could use some white watercolor that is really pigmented. It's up to you. And it does a pretty decent job of covering it up. Alrighty, so the best tip that I can give you for watercolor is, while you can definitely leave this here for sure, I personally like to go in with an ink pen and really sort of accentuate the little details that I couldn't otherwise do with a thicker watercolor brush. So here I'm going in and I'm making all of the petals of the lavender come out. I'm accentuating the hairs and the bristles on the bees, and I'm giving them legs and appendages. And you can do this with a variety of things. You can use a Sharpie, you can use a gel pen, you can use different colored pens, but this is a really great way to sort of bring life to your artwork and give it the little details that you couldn't otherwise give with a watercolor brush. And then here I am going in with that white jelly roll, and I'm depicting places where I think the sunlight would hit this sort of painting, on places like the tips of the petals, on some of the hairs on the bee, and I am using these really sort of general swirly strokes, and I wanted it to have a little bit of an artistic feel, but also I wanted it to be very relaxed and casual, and that's the way that lavender makes me feel. I would say go at your own pace and do what you think looks right for your own painting. And that's just about it. Thank you, everybody, so much